All right, everyone. Thanks for joining the first quarterly webinar with the Angler Survey Committee. Got a great agenda lined up for you today. First I'm going to go over some of the feedback that we received from that interactive polling that we had during the introductory meeting back in January. And we're going to talk about how we're going to take that feedback and feed it into committee proceedings moving forward. Nick Sievert has a presentation going over the work that's gone into maintaining and managing the CreelCat database. And Chris Wheaton and Jason Edwards are going to give a presentation going over the Pacific RecFIN program and talk about the work that goes into collecting the data and Creel estimates that are conducted along the western US coast. So for those of you that were not a part of or did not view the introductory Angler Survey Committee meeting, we held a series of interactive polls, and we also conducted a follow-up survey as well to identify areas where we might focus committee proceedings on in the future. And in this presentation, I'm going to go over what we found with some of that data. First, I'll give you an overview of what our current group composition looks like. Among the over 100 current members of this committee, most participants are employed by state agencies. This is followed by a much smaller proportion in academia, federal agencies, or other entities not listed there. This group is very regionally dispersed. Shown here is a word cloud of the states where members who signed up for our mailing list are from. So far, we've generated participation from 38 different states and Canada, with contingents representing each of the 4 major AFS divisions. While this relatively large group is primarily employed by state agencies, these members come from a diversity of backgrounds when it comes to their connection to angler surveys. And the rest of the survey questions help provide some insight on that. The next question I'm going to go over is the motivation behind angler surveys, where we asked respondents, why are angler surveys important to your work? Now, we took the specific responses we received and we binned each response into categories based on the common themes that emerged. As the responses were varied and detailed, many fit into multiple categories. It's certainly a qualitative approach, and I'm sure several listening may have some ideas on the best way to conduct an analysis like this, but for now, we think we can learn a lot from some of the common themes that emerged. Over half of respondents indicated that finding ways to measure angler preferences or behaviors is one of the driving factors in conducting angler surveys. Additionally, gathering data to inform management decisions was also identified as a primary motivation for conducting angler surveys. However, when it came to the type of data that was indicated as being important to management decisions, responses also included each of these other categories listed here, whether it was measuring fishery performance, exploitation, utilization, or monitoring species of concern. This underscores the wide range of ways angler surveys can feed into management. Next survey question I'll review is going to be focusing on areas of future innovations surrounding angler surveys, where we asked respondents, where do you anticipate needs for innovating angler surveys? Now we took a similar approach with binning these responses as we did with the importance question. Shown here are the top 5 categories among each of the responses. Plurality of members indicated anticipating innovations that improve efficiency surrounding angler surveys as being important for the future of angler surveys. Now, there's a lot of different angles that respondents came with this. Some of the more common responses surrounding efficiency were related to finding ways to best allocate limited budgets. Another very common response was finding ways to develop real-time estimates that will feed into real-time management decisions. Finding ways to integrate self-reporting data as well as utilizing emerging technology were also identified as important parts of innovating the future of angler surveys. And we're gonna primarily focus on improving efficiency with future committee proceedings. We're also going to focus on finding ways to integrate emerging technology as well with angler surveys, and also finding ways to better improve our understanding of angler preferences and behaviors was also an identified area of innovation need that we're going to focus committee proceedings on as well. So the last question I'll go over surrounded potential committee duties, where we asked members to indicate what they would like to see accomplished by this committee. Now, this was left open-ended at the end of the meeting, so we didn't receive as high of a response rate as we did with some of those other questions, but the top 3 responses that we found with the top 3 responses align nicely with some of the committee goals that we're going to set with future committee proceedings. A plurality of members indicated that coordinating across boundaries that are traditionally unconnected is something that we can strive for with this committee. And we hope to do that with improving communication across these boundaries. And one of the things that we hope to do is to continue to have these webinars that gets the group together. And we're going to focus on finding ways to improve communication. Many respondents also indicated that there's a need for better tools pertaining to data management, estimation, and we're going to focus on working to improve these tools while also trying to focus on improving the processes surrounding survey design in addition. And another commonly indicated area of focus surrounded putting the minds together in this network to not only develop best practices, but also put these procedures in writing and document and publish these best practices, as has been done in other areas of fisheries. And we hope to do this such that these best practices can be easily implemented wherever angler surveys feed into management. So with the relatively large group that characterizes anglers in many different ways, we envision that the best path forward for this committee is going to be to effectively subset the larger group into subcommittees based on some of the common themes that emerged in that survey. And to that end, we're moving to create 4 subcommittees, each with the common goal of increasing efficiency with limited resources as it pertains to angler surveys. To help with developing better tools for estimation and survey design, we're forming the Survey Design and Estimation Subcommittee. It's going to be chaired by Kevin Pope. For those of you that are unfamiliar with Kevin, Kevin's a professor at the co-op at University of Nebraska, and he has a lot of experience working with state agencies to design Creel surveys and deliver angler estimates. Focusing on the practices and tools for the management of angler survey data, we're forming the Data Management Subcommittee, which is going to be chaired by Nick Sievert and Nick Guild. Nick S. has been pivotal in creating and maintaining the CreelCat database, while Nick G. works for the communication division at Texas Parks and Wildlife and has a ton of knowledge when it comes to building tools that query, clean, and house data sets. Focusing on better understanding angler preferences and behaviors, we're forming the Human Dimensions Subcommittee, which is going to be chaired by Susan Steffen and Rebecca Krogman. Susan is a Human Dimensions Specialist in Kansas, and Rebecca is a fisheries researcher at Iowa DNR, and both hold a lot of experience when it comes to developing surveys related to the human dimensions of fisheries. And lastly, focusing on utilizing emerging technology to innovate angler surveys, we're forming the Emerging Technology Subcommittee, which is going to be chaired by Paul Venturelli and Tommy Johnson. Paul is a leader when it comes to using applications to characterize anglers, and Tommy is a biologist with Iowa DNR and also a graduate student at University of Florida, whose work is particularly focused on utilizing anonymous location data to characterize recreational use. So you may be wondering how you can become a part of each of these subcommittees, and we plan to do that through the creation of the Angler Survey Committee Directory. Now, as the primary goal of this committee is going to be to create a space for fishery professionals to connect and provide feedback relating to research or management questions, we are working on building this online directory such that if a member of this committee has an inquiry related to specific research or management interest or expertise, they can find another member who has that type of interest and expertise that aligns with them. So if you follow this QR code or the link that I think Abby or Nick are going to throw in the chat here, you'll find just a few quick questions that we're going to use to populate that directory, which will also include joining each. You can choose which of the 4 subcommittees you have an interest in joining. So please fill out that quick form if you can to join this directory and help us work to improve the communication among this committee. And yeah, with that, I think I have time for maybe a quick question, and then we'll transition over to Nick's presentation. All right, I'll let you take it away, Nick.
Great, thanks, Dave. Give me 1 second here while I just juggle screens and get things shared. Okay, thumbs up, Dave. Are you seeing the PowerPoint?
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. Okay, well, thanks everybody. Thanks for the opportunity to kind of share what we've been working with you all. So today I'm going to be talking a little bit about the CreelCat project. I'd like to acknowledge all my co-authors and the folks who've been involved in helping develop this. And most of all, I want to thank all the agencies and their staff who helped contribute the data that we've used to populate this. It was a big ask trying to get all this data pulled, a lot of work on the end of people providing it. So we really appreciate it, and we certainly couldn't have done it without you all. I know a lot of you folks are on the call today that helped out with this. So thanks so much. So as you all know, Creel and angler surveys are typically used to evaluate recreational fisheries. For CreelCat, we're using it basically to capture information that's been collected related to catch and harvest, angler preferences, effort and fishing pressure, as well as angler demographics. Oh, sorry, before I jumped into this, I did want to note, I'm going to try to move through it quick so we have time for questions at the end. If there's stuff we're not able to get to, feel free to reach out to me. I'm always happy to talk about this and get any input or answer any questions folks might have. So for CreelCat, we were really interested primarily in angler intercept surveys. However, that doesn't have coverage across the entire country. So in cases where there wasn't angler intercept data available, we also incorporated other survey types like information from mail, phone, or online surveys, angler diary programs, and drop boxes. So Creel surveys are commonly used for developing regulations, stocking practice, assessing economic impacts, and even infrastructure development work. So a lot of this is kind of locally focused on individual water bodies or maybe regional stuff, like part of a state. However, the information that's collected in these angler surveys can also be incredibly useful at large scale. So this information can be used for national and regional questions, and it can be used for looking at kind of long-term trends in recreational angling. So some examples of ways that we identified this information having utility include impacts of climate change on these systems, assessing recreational fisheries as social ecological systems, addressing issues related to recruitment, retention, and reactivation, looking at how shifting angler demographics might be affecting these systems, comparing regions to one another or looking for patterns across or within regions, and looking at some behavioral shifts that are starting to be identified among anglers. So by bringing all this data together from across the country, there's a lot of large-scale investigations that we're hoping this will help facilitate and give additional insight into. So CreelCat didn't start out with an objective of pulling all this information together. Initially, some of the folks working on this project were interested in assessing and generating an estimate of fish harvest occurring nationally based on statewide estimates. What they found when pulling this data together is that these statewide estimates were pretty rare. However, Creel and angler survey data were very common and held a lot of potential utility. So that's kind of what facilitated this project. So to get things rolling, there was an initial workshop which aimed to get feedback from folks from state agencies as well as federal agencies and academic experts on basically how to go about pulling this off. So how do you go about getting the data? How do you structure it to make it useful? What features are going to make it valuable for managers and researchers? And so we had this meeting back in, I believe it was May of 2020, where we kind of got solicited feedback on how to go about doing this. And what we came out of it with were kind of two primary objectives. One was to develop this robust data set that could be used to support research and management, and also to kind of create an interactive tool set that will allow people to actually visualize and use the data. So can they easily pull out the data they need to work with, and can we provide tools that make using it easy? So filtering, searching tables, creating plots, creating maps, those kind of things. And the kind of outcome goals we had from this effort broadly was to support research and management, but one of the primary ways of doing that was to improve data accessibility. And this was both to make data accessible to researchers outside of the agency that collected it, so a neighboring state or someone who's looking at doing a regional assessment or things like that, but also to folks within a state. What we found is in many cases, the information compiled in these angler surveys is buried in old reports, or it might be in an Excel spreadsheet on someone's laptop. And so even within an agency, that data wasn't always accessible. So by putting it into CreelCat, it makes it easily accessible to everyone, not only outside of the agency, but also within the agency. We wanted to help create some tools that could be useful for report generation. So easy ways to generate maps or plots or tables that could be directly exported and used in a report or a presentation. We wanted to create tools that would be useful for data exploration. So just trying to look and see what's going on across time or space within any kind of scope of interest. And one of the things that was also identified as a kind of outcome that had a lot of utility is gaining insight from neighbors. So when Dave was just talking about the survey results, one of the things that came up was kind of networking across among states. And one of the things that we discussed is sometimes it's interesting to see what's going on next door, and maybe you're seeing shifts occurring in your state that might be mirrored in another state, or perhaps you're not collecting data that one of your neighbors is. So you may not collect information on angler preferences, but the state adjacent to you does. By being able to go and look at their data sets, maybe you can kind of gain some insight into what might be happening within your fisheries. And so as things stand right now, we have over 14,000 surveys available in the CreelCat database. And by survey, we're basically identifying water body results for a discrete time period, typically a year or less. Some cases like mail surveys and phone surveys, obviously there's representation for a lot of water bodies, but we're categorizing each of those water bodies as a separate survey. So currently released, we have 35 states and territories. We have data from more, but as you can imagine, processing all of it takes a long time. So several of these states we received data from, and we're just still working through processing it and getting it released in our approved data set. So there's more to come soon. As far as data goes, we have information related to 135 different fields that has data about the surveys themselves, information about water bodies, information about angler effort metrics, information about angler demographics, what fish are being caught and harvested, as well as angler preferences or what they're targeting. So our table with survey information includes information about survey methodology, when the surveys took place, where they took place, identifying which water body was being characterized and where it's located, and general information like that. Angler effort data includes estimates of angler effort hours, estimates of the number of days spent angling, number of anglers, as well as number of outings. And as you can imagine, across the country, there's a lot of differences in what data is being collected and how it's being reported. And so not every state has things, or not even within states, is set up the same way. So obviously not all of this information is available for every survey, but across all surveys, this is the information that we have documented and recorded in the database. So as far as fish information goes, we have estimates of catch, harvest, and release. That includes estimated totals, percentages, as well as rate information. So for example, harvest per effort hour or catch per water body acre, information like that. And we have that information attributed across taxonomic levels, so ranging all the way from subspecies to families, as well as information that gets reported for non-taxonomic groups, so things like trout or panfish. We also have information on angler preference. Typically, this is reported as effort hours spent by anglers targeting specific taxa. Occasionally, rather than effort hours, it's the percentage of effort that was spent targeting specific taxa. And so all this information is captured in the database when it was available. We also have some demographic information, including angler residency, the age of anglers, and the sex of anglers. And so all of this information was pulled together into this database, and then in addition to the database itself, the series of tables containing this information, we also created an application that can be used to filter, summarize, and visualize the data. So this database is publicly available on the web, and I will put a link in the chat to this at the end of the talk, and also I have it on the last slide. And when you
already go ahead and put it in the chat, so go ahead.
Great.
Sorry.
No, you're good. Thanks, Abby. And so this information, if you access it through the database application, you can download and interact with the data directly there. So instead of just downloading the CSV files, there's an interface that makes the data kind of easy to work with, and it also provides a lot of contextual information that will help folks more appropriately use the data because of issues like standardization and differences among the surveys. So if you go to the application, you land on a home page that has some information about what data is in there. There's also a user guide that can help kind of guide you through using it. And then one of the first kind of interactive pieces you come to is the data availability tab. And that allows you to just see what information is currently contained in the database. This will allow you to view information as either a table or a map, and it'll give you the number of surveys by state, the number of surveys by taxa. So you could look at, okay, how many Creel surveys do we have harvest information for smallmouth bass, for example, and you could pull that up. You can also look up information by field. So say you're interested in angler residency data, you can pull that up as a field you're interested in and look either as a table or a map of where that information is present in the database. And you can also view a breakdown by survey methodology. So if you're only interested in angler intercept surveys, you can see where is that information available, and so on. So that's kind of how you see what information is in there. When it comes to actually using the data, there's kind of a few steps that you go through when you're using the app. So the issue is obviously with this large data set, with all those fields and all those surveys, it gets very large very quickly, which makes it a little difficult to work with. So what we suggest as a first step is selecting just those surveys or data you're interested in. And you can do this in two ways. You can either do it by a map, and you can draw a polygon around the area you're interested in obtaining surveys for. Or you can use filters, and that will allow you to select what you're interested in filtering by, and then you can make selections, and that'll reduce that data set from the 20,000 surveys down to whatever meets your criteria. So you can say if you want to filter it by state or survey type or water body size or the year the survey occurred in, and there's a whole host of different filters you can apply. So you can really reduce that data set to just what you're interested in, all the way down to a single water body in a single year, and it'll just make it much more manageable to work with. So after determining and selecting what surveys you're interested in working with, you can go ahead and select which fields you want to work with. Again, with 138 different metrics or fields that are captured, and then all of the angler preference and fish data gets a separate column for each metric by taxa, you can end up with a giant table really quick. So if you're only interested in like harvest information, you can select, I just want harvest information, or I just want demographic information, and you can select which species you want information for. So again, you go and you pull out what fields you want to populate your data tables with. That being said, you can obviously put in as much as you want. At a certain point, it might overload the server, so you might have to reduce what you're working with depending on how many surveys you include and how many fields, but you can obviously play around with it and include as much or as little as you need for your work. And if you do run into issues with it just can't support the number of fields and number of surveys you're trying to work with, you can always just export the full data set and work with it locally on your computer. So kind of the first step in looking at the data and working with it is simply looking at the table. There's going to be a way you can view and filter the table. This will allow you to export it to a CSV, Excel file, PDF, print it. So this is based on the surveys and fields you included. You can sort and filter any of the fields. You can perform searches. You can export custom selections, things like that. So you get access to this table containing whatever data you were interested in. Whenever you're working with the data, there's also going to be this data warning pop-up that comes up. I'm not going to spend a lot of time now going through it all, but basically it's going to identify any instances where there's potential inconsistencies with the data you've pulled together. So different survey types or different timing or duration of surveys or different survey methods or issues around taxonomic attribution. For example, you're potentially using surveys that were or survey data that was attributed at the genus and family level, and you were trying to look at the species level. And all of this gets populated specifically based on the data you pulled into it. So if you were looking at largemouth bass information and there's a bunch of surveys that were attributed to black bass in that data set, it's going to notify you that you have this unattributed taxa, those black bass attributed surveys, which can't necessarily be have values get attributed to that lower species level. It's just an example. So this is always going to provide you this contextual information that's important for interpreting the data. You can also perform custom summaries where you can calculate different summary statistics such as ranges, means, stuff like that by whatever kind of grouping variables you want to use. And you can create custom visualizations. These include, I'm going to go through them pretty quick, but you can create scatter plots, pie charts, bar charts, maps, as well as time series plots that show individual metrics across time for specific surveys or water bodies. Additionally, you can create up to 4 visualizations simultaneously that interact with each other. So in this example, we're viewing a data set for a few different metrics related to certain species, and where we can see a map, a scatter plot, as well as a pie chart. In this case, a selection of surveys was made on the scatter plot, walleye catch percents that were above 40%. It highlights those survey locations on the map, and then it's plotting out a community composition pie chart of those selected surveys. So that's just one example of kind of how the database or the data viewer online allows you to interact with the data. In addition to making selections on like a scatter plot, you can make selections on a map. So here, surveys were selected by drawing a polygon around water bodies in an area of northern Wisconsin. It created a time series plot for those water bodies of trends in largemouth and walleye catch. It created a plot of release and harvest estimates across those species from those selected water bodies, and it highlighted where those surveys fell out on the map across a broader region. And finally, here's another example where water bodies were selected on the map by county, and then it highlights the harvest composition of water bodies in that county. So that's just kind of a quick way of showing you can create multiple visualizations. They can interact with each other. You can also make selections of the data in a table, and it will highlight them or create visualizations based on those selections you made in a table. So I kind of rushed through that a little bit, but I wanted to leave at least a couple minutes for questions. Here are the links to both the data release as the DOI, as well as the web application is the R-Connect URL. So feel free to check either of those out. You can find my email addresses there. Feel free to reach out to me with any questions. And if we have a minute, I'm happy to answer any questions. Otherwise, reach out to me anytime. I appreciate everyone's time and interest and all the help from the folks who contributed data for this project.
Yeah, we have time for a couple questions if you want to throw one in the chat, or go ahead and speak up if you have any questions for Nick. All right, looks like we got one by Kale.
Yeah, thanks, Nick. That was a great overview. I was curious, how do you contribute to this? Like, is there like a interface? Is there someone, like, if you submit data, someone that is QA/QCing it? Like, what's the process? You obviously put in a ton of effort to get data into it to this point, and what's the process of continuing, to merge data into it?
Yeah, that's a great question. I'm glad you brought that up because that's something I should have thought to highlight. So yeah, we would love for folks to continue to contribute data to this. We're going to keep it alive and keep it growing as we're able to. So for right now, we don't. One of our potential goals is having people be able to directly input data and submit it to that, but we're not at that stage yet. So right now, if you have data that you'd like to contribute, emailing it to me or reaching out to me and we can kind of facilitate that transfer is the best way to get data on there. Obviously, there's information is held in different agencies in a lot of different ways, and so we made our best attempts to make the connections needed to make this request, but there's definitely places where we could have missed potential connections and information. So anyone on here who's hearing this, if you have any thoughts or ideas about potentially contributing Creel or Angler survey data, we'd appreciate it. And I will note that we made this initial request a few years ago, and so we've been taking our time to populate it. And so we're going to be reaching back out in the near future to our contacts to let them know, one, that their data is available and it's been completed, but also if they have updated data, they'd be willing to contribute, where we plan on doing another release with this updated data. So thanks, Gail.
Great, thank you.
All right, well, oh, we got one more from John.
Yeah, thanks, Nick. This is super cool as people have been chiming in. And we have a bunch of data in there from Minnesota, and it's super exciting to see it. And I've been actually using it, which leads me down the path of a question of what's the kind of, I know it's probably hard to answer, but like, what's your longer term plans and capacity to maintain this sort of large of a database and the application? Because just to avoid redundancies, we're constantly talking about how to do something like this in-house, right? And the fear being, okay, if we pivot to relying on something like CreelCat and it's an outside source, is it going to be maintained? Can we rely on it? So I don't know if you have an answer for it, but it's just kind of one of those lingering things we struggle with internally. So either way, super cool and appreciate it.
Yeah, that's a great question. So I'll start off by saying everything that we're doing, since this is through USGS, is open source. So we have all of the code for the application is all released and available. So this is something that if you wanted to take and use that code to kind of support your own version of it, that's available. And so it will always be documented and available. So worst case, even if we go away, the underlying information is still there. That being said, we have plans to continue maintaining this. Obviously, you can never completely predict how things will change and go, and there's a level of risk to that. But we have funding to continue to support it for the next few years at minimum, and I think the intention is to continue supporting it long term. Abby, my supervisor, is on, and so I don't know if she has anything not to put her on the spot, but if she wants to jump in on that.
Yeah, I don't think I have anything more to add to what Nick said. I mean, I think from the outset of this project and bringing together people to talk about this topic, thinking about life cycle planning has always been on our minds. And yeah, as Nick said, there's nothing. We have no guarantees, but the more investment and buy-in we can get from data providers back to potentially becoming data users, like keeping that loop closely tied, I think there's more likelihood for us to maintain continuity with the system.
Glad to hear you're using it and it's working well for you. Go ahead, Rob.
Hi, thanks. Can you hear me okay?
Yep.
This is my first meeting. I missed the first webinar, so I apologize if any of this had been covered. But does the database provide any information about the accuracy of estimates? Or is there CVs or precision estimates? And then is there ways to access survey documentation for the individual programs so you can, not all surveys are created equal. So if you're interested in learning more about a specific survey or try and determine if estimates are actually comparable or anything like that? Does it include information about design documentation?
Yeah, that's a great question. I know we have other folks who need to present, so I'm going to keep this quick, but please do follow up with me if this is of interest, because I can provide a lot more information. So in places where it was available, we've included measures of data reliability when they were reported. So that was typically standard error. So we typically have standard error for the estimates. As far as providing direct access to the documentation, we've reported a lot of what we have information about the survey methods that were used. However, we aren't directly releasing the reports or data that we received just simply because while we got permission to use the data, we don't necessarily have permission to release the reports or information we directly received. So if there was instances where you were interested in finding out more, at that point, you'd probably have to reach out to me directly, and I could see if I could answer questions. Otherwise, I might refer you to the providing agency. So please, you got my email. Get in touch if you have more questions. I don't want to chat too long about this, but happy to talk about it more. But that's the quick answer.
Yeah, we're a little over time, but it's okay. We got that last 5 minutes to bleed into, but we're going to transition over to Chris Wheaton and Jason Edwards. They're going to talk about the Pacific RecFIN program. So,
okay,
Chris,
can you hear me okay?
Yeah, we can hear you. I think you can share your screen whenever you're ready.
Okay, I'm going to try that now. Okay, Jason, you see my slides?
Yep, looking good.
Okay, so my name is Chris Wheaton. I work for the Pacific States Marine Fisheries Commission, as does Jason Edwards. And we're at a different point in the data collection, data sharing effort than the presentation you just heard. Our program has existed for a while because it's part of a shared resource management program for fisheries in the ocean. And before I start, I'd like to thank the kind folks from NOAA Fisheries who support us financially and also with a lot of good scientific oversight, and also our state partners. So I'm going to talk a little bit about how we got to the point we're at now. We're an interstate fishery commission, and there are 3 of us across the country. They're established by Congress. They're neutral. They focus on marine species. States are actually our members. They make up our governing body. And we're established to basically support marine fisheries programs under the Magnuson-Stevens Act. We administer grants. We do all sorts of fisheries managed activities, but mainly it's scientific and not management oriented, with the exception of the Atlantic States Marine Fisheries Commission, which does have management authority. There's also a fisheries commission in the Great Lakes that was established separately, so I'm not going to refer to them too much. One of the aspects of the commission's role, and one of the things we help to facilitate, is the management of fisheries information through the FINS network. And I won't read all those examples in the interest of time, but there are a number of fisheries databases and fisheries information networks that are established around the country. Some of these, like RecFIN, are recreationally based, and some of them are commercially based. And there's a whole different can of worms about commercial fisheries information because it tends to be proprietary and data is closely guarded by people that want to earn a living catching fish. And so you're not going to hear me refer too much to that kind of level of information or the data security or data management needs there, but they do exist and they make things fairly complicated. Typically, the commissions do help run these fisheries information networks. They're developed because of the interjurisdictional and multi-state nature of the data and the fisheries. We form the data warehouse capacity backbone of this. We standardize and integrate data, maintain, store, and report out data to the fisheries management users, and meet regional data needs. In our case, PSMFC was established in 1947. Our member states are listed there. For those of you that are paying attention, you may note that Idaho does not have an ocean front, but they do have anadromous fisheries. And of course, on the West Coast, anadromous fisheries are extremely important. And Idaho's interest is explained by their significant salmon and steelhead populations. And we, as I mentioned earlier, we also support PACFIN and ACFIN, which are commercial fisheries databases. RecFIN was established back in '92. It's funded by NOAA Fisheries and their MRIP program, Marine Recreational Information Program. We manage recreational fisheries data that we receive from California, Oregon, and Washington. And our partners are the Fish and Wildlife agencies in those states, as well as some private organizations like the Sport Fishing Association of California. And the partner agencies that help us manage and also utilize data also include the Pacific Fisheries Management Council, which is important in managing these shared fisheries. The fisheries science centers with NOAA are also integrally involved. So our data partners are those states, and the state surveys and estimation, how we built this system, basically started in 1976. There was a previous marine recreational fisheries survey, statistics survey called MRFS that was established in 1979. That transitioned in about 2004 to the current system of surveys that are replacing MRFs and managed by the states. And I'm just going to briefly give an overview of those fisheries survey programs that tell you that each state manages their own fisheries information and collection system separately and independently, but the data is ultimately shared, which, as you would imagine, is both a rewarding but also a challenge. So in Washington, they have an ocean sampling program, they have a marine fish science program, and they also have a Puget Sound sampling program, which is managed differently. They all manage information differently. They collect catch estimates, access information, biological information, boat surveys, and so on. In Oregon, we have a ocean recreational boat survey and a biological sampling program that's based on commercial private fishing vessels, CPFVs, that are manned by people that go out and collect biological data on fish. And then in California, there's a series of recreational surveys for private and rental boats, commercial passenger fishing vessels, and structures and beaches and banks, all of them run by the various state agencies. So for background on how the system works, the funding that we receive from NOAA to manage and collect data also supports to some level the fisheries survey programs in these states. So we grant subcontracts to Oregon, Washington, and California. They use those in part to fund fisheries surveys that's supplemented by their own revenue sources and also other sources of funds from NOAA. So in addition to managing data, the RecFIN program helps to actually support fisheries data collection in the field through subcontracts to these various organizations. So getting to the database and our reporting system, we consolidate and integrate all these different data sets, process the data into functional information, and then provide analysis, interpretation, and tools to manage the data. That is made available to state and federal fisheries managers, analysts, universities, and basically anyone who approaches us with a bona fide need to use the data. We use a Oracle relational database and Apex reporting tools, and the available data that we have goes back to 1980 through the MRFs, the Washington, Oregon, California catch and effort estimates, a trip level sample interview data set that goes back to 2004, biological data like lengths and weights that goes back to 2004. We've got age data from Washington and Oregon. We've got the private vessel onboard observer data from Oregon and California. We've got biological data from the Sport Fishing Association of California, primarily on highly migratory species from about 2015 on. And then we've also got historic catch estimates back to 1967 in Washington. And all of this is accessible. As I said, if you have a bona fide need for the information, you just ask us and we give you password protected access to the data. That is necessary because of the definition of personally important information. If you parse down closely enough into our data sets, you get into what we call the rule of three, which is if you can get your data set down to a small enough level, you could actually interpret what specific boat or person caught fish when, and that's protected information in at least some of these states. And so that is one of the reasons it's password protected. And so the data use is basically at the council level, state management level. There's in-season monitoring of catch estimates and management of quota fisheries. People use our data sets for regulation development, for stock assessments, and then it's rolled up and used by NOAA fisheries folks for fisheries of the United States reports and the fisheries economics of the United States reports. In addition to what I just rolled through quickly, we coordinate the Marine Recreational Information Program of NOAA's attempt and management of coordination of data management across the country. And they are currently involved in survey and estimation certification, survey and data standards to address the data quality issues that Rob mentioned briefly a moment ago. We're guided by a regional implementation plan and a council of managers from across the Pacific states that sort of guide the direction of the data management program, and that's an MRIP managed effort. And we also participate in education and outreach efforts such as fish identification materials. We're developing a fish ID mobile application with the state of Washington. There's handouts for identification of marine species, online reference images, and then we also help to distribute descending devices to safely reduce mortality on deep water species that are hauled up to the surface and suffer barotrauma. So we educate people about that and also distribute devices. And that is a quick run through of the RecFIN program, and I'd be happy to answer any questions. And if they're difficult questions, we're going to refer them to Jason, who's our database manager and so on. Anything, David?
Yeah, well, thanks a lot. Thanks a lot for your presentation, Chris. It's there's some really important work, and it's good to see a glimpse of the work that you guys do with that program. All right. Well, that concludes our. Oh, Abby's got a question.
I'll go ahead and ask a question just from the other side on CreelCat, and just thinking towards if there are any lessons learned from such a longer standing program, and if you guys have any suggestions that might help us kind of maintain and advance the work that we're doing on the other side with our database.
That's an interesting question, Abby, and a really complicated one. Just, I guess, to keep it brief, the one thing that I think was brought up by several of your questioners when your presentation was given was the continuity and maintenance of this data set. I mean, not to criticize you specifically or anybody specifically, but in my career, you see lots of people start things because they're new and shiny and fun. But the maintenance is really the difficult part because that takes work and gets down into the nitty gritty. So do a lot of thinking about that, I guess. That would be my one piece of advice.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you very much.
All right. Well, that concludes the first Angler Survey Committee webinar. Thanks everyone for joining and being a part of this. This is really great to connect with you guys once again and giving you a picture of what the next webinar is going to look like. And I think we've nailed down a date. July 17th is when we're going to hold that. I think around the same time, 11 a.m. Central Time as well. And with that, we have two presentations lined up. Tommy Johnson is going to give a talk on some of the work he's done with anonymous location cell phone data to characterize recreational use, and also some members of the Washington Department of Wildlife and Fisheries are going to talk about the work that they've done with standardization and data management, as well as building a Bayesian model to develop angler estimates. So we got another great lineup for you for the next one in July, and we look forward to connecting with you guys again then. And once again, thanks for coming out. And I'm going to follow up with email giving you that link to the Angler Survey Directory. Please fill out that form and become a part of that directory. And I'm going to populate that information to a shared Google Sheet, and I'll share that with everyone as well. But once again, thanks for joining, everybody.
Cool. Thanks, David.